Welcome to our Synergy Commons webinar, where we equip missional leaders to lead networks. Our topic today is, Can You Hear Me Now? Facilitating effective virtual network meetings. My name is Michael Casper, and I'm your host, and our guest, which I'm so excited about, is Warren Janzen. As we get going, if I could have the next slide too, there we go. So as we get going, I wanted to share a little bit. We're coming from Vision Synergy is who's hosting this, and we're all about advocating, equipping, and advising global networks all around the world focused on the unreached. And specifically, this is a member benefit of our online community. It's a community of practice called the Synergy Commons. And we have more than 1,300 global network leaders. One of the best parts of this community is that we share between one another some of the best practices, what's working, what we can improve, and how we can challenge one another. And what a time to come together in church history, in the growth of the church, to really sharpen one another in the area of collaboration. Our guest today, I'm so excited to introduce. You've been seeing the write-up as you've signed up for this webinar, is Warren Janzen, and he comes from 34 years of ministry experience with Send International, and most recently with several years as the international director. And he knows this topic really, really well. I'm excited to personally learn from him and engage with him. And I want to encourage you to use that chat box and the Q&A as we engage this topic together. I do want to say one thing. Warren, if you didn't know this, he climbs mountains with his son. He lives in Vancouver, and so BC, not Washington, but he climbs mountains with his son who lives at home, and they've already done 2 peaks recently, and they have 2 more planned. Yeah. So pretty cool. Thanks, Warren.
Well, thanks, Michael. It's a real privilege to be with you here today. I've chose this picture of a stand of trees to kind of capture what we're doing here, because each of your networks above ground may look very, very different. But below ground, it's this collaborative network underground that helps them to grow and keeps them healthy. And so today, I want to investigate the communication element of this underground network of the stand of trees. Well, today, this topic is so very relevant. We are living in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous situation. There's a lot of other things that make it volatile, but particularly right now, the COVID-19 crisis is bringing a particular threat to our globe and is bringing incredible responses by governments and cities and families. So there's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of, this isn't a time to isolate. This is a time for careful community. And you as network leaders are part of these careful communities that want to network, that want to collaborate, that want to come together at this very particular time for the sake of the gospel. So you are leading or participating in these high impact missional networks that are accelerating the progress of the gospel to the very ends of the earth. You are equipping ministry leaders for effective collaboration, and you're enabling the church to accomplish together what we can't do alone. And so this vitally important ministry at this particular time right now is just so critical. And I thank you for being a part of that and rising to that challenge. Well, the big idea today is that leading virtual meetings with our networks can be really challenging, especially when we have gaps in terms of time zones or in terms of locations, when we have gaps in terms of culture, when we have gaps in terms of just how we approach things. That can make a normal meeting with people face-to-face a challenge, but it is particularly different and difficult when you are using technology as your main means of communication and collaboration. So we can though develop our ability by understanding how to bridge the distance or span the distance between members and their experiences bridge these cultural value differences, and build trust through a few key vital behaviors. So to begin with, just a quick overview of what is the difference between face-to-face meetings and virtual meetings. In face-to-face, obviously, you're all in the same location. Your members are selected because of a common vision, common values, common theology, and you have different skills and abilities to bring to the table. In a face-to-face meeting, you are able to read body language and to adjust to the mood in the room. And technology helps our meetings, but it's very different in a virtual meeting because you're in different locations. People are not available to just come together down the hallway and get together around a table. And it's really hard to read body language and to read the pauses or the quiet in a virtual meeting, and to try to shape it or respond and adjust the meeting as you go along. And technology is essential to conduct our meetings together. So what happens when you are absolutely dependent upon technology for getting together and collaborating? And when you have people who are coming from increasingly diverse backgrounds and diverse locations, and technology is what is needed to bring you together, people then have this challenge of feeling a disconnect, a feeling of social and emotional distance from their co-collaborators, from their teammates, from the people in the network. And it's magnified by this virtual environment. And studies show, there's lots of studies about this that show that work slows down actually, and innovation or ideation or free thinking drops. Satisfaction falls, and it's harder to build trust in an environment where people feel disconnected. So in this webinar, we want to try to just get at the concept of how do we bridge the distance that people normally feel when they're communicating and collaborating over technology. So what creates disconnect specifically in a virtual environment? Meeting outside of work hours. I regularly, my day starts at about 5:36. I get Asia during that time, and then I have a lull between about 2 to 4:30, and then Europe comes on, or I'm sorry, it's the opposite. Europe's in the morning, and Asia will come on in the evening. And I have virtual meetings, and there's times when my leadership team, it spans the globe, and so every virtual meeting I have with my leadership team, somebody is up late at night, somebody is up early in the morning, and so it's outside of those normal work hours, and that creates this sense of, we're not coordinated, because somebody's always up at a weird time. You miss the casual connections around face-to-face meetings, the breaks that you take, the lunch that you have together or whatever. You just miss those casual times. And there's often too many people on the screen, and there's too little opportunity to get to know them all. There's too little time to put into the work of this network, because when you have virtual networks, oftentimes people can be a part of multiple virtual networks or multiple virtual teams, and they then have only so much time to give to this particular one. Sometimes disconnect is created because of poor internet connection or a lack of experience with networking software. And then there's this whole thing of differing cultural values, like, well, what is on time? And we'll talk about that more in just a little bit, but there's times and places, or there's cultural differences that crop up in a virtual meeting that are hard to pick up sometimes. Like, do these people want direct feedback and direct comments, or more indirect? How are we going to make decisions when we're on a virtual team and you can't really see how people are feeling? How are we going to disagree virtually when you can't have a side conversation right after the meeting, just down the hallway? These combine to create a sense that we are not well coordinated. What are you seeing, Daniel? Or I'm sorry, what are you seeing, Michael?
Sure. Well, we have 71% who have voted, and we have that 41% as our highest, missing the casual connections around face-to-face meetings.
Yeah.
Pretty close to that is also right below it, missing that casual connection around face-to-face poor internet connection. I know with many of our sisters and brothers in majority world, and just in general, I mean, here, that is a big challenge, that poor internet connection. I know you've probably dealt with that in your days, Warren.
Yeah, I have a number of coworkers in Southeast Asia, and they experience brownouts. And so, right in the middle of a meeting, right in the middle of an
Yeah.
intense discussion, all of a sudden, they're gone, and I can't get them until the next day or later. So, yeah, that's a pretty consistent frustration.
What stands out to you, Warren, as you
Well, it's
skim?
pretty consistent across the board that all of these factors are at least, more than 20%, 25% of what people are facing. But as you said, the largest is the missing the casual connections around face-to-face meetings. All right, well, we will talk about that as we move on. So why don't you close that poll result and I'll move on. So we're going to talk, first of all, here, three basic things, but the first one is how to span distance in our meetings. How do we bridge the distance that we feel, that disconnect that we feel in the meetings? And I would just say start early. When I hold meetings, we always turn on the connection device, whatever you're using. We turn it on 10 minutes before, and we try to just get that casual conversation going to catch up on family or hobbies or shared interests, just that, that kind of water cooler or lunchroom talk. What I've also done is each meeting, get one person to pick up their monitor or whatever and just kind of show your other co-workers or co-network people your space. It helps it helps to build humanity around the people that you're seeing on the screen. If you're only seeing their heads or their upper torsos, that's just one piece. But I get people to tour us around their working space, wherever that is, so that we understand where they're coming from. And I do that like one person each meeting. And then to make sure that the purpose of the meeting is clear, there's this mindset when you are in a virtual meeting, you're saving time, you are being really good stewards of your time. And so people want to know, what are we here for, and how are we going to do this? So I identify each agenda item in one of four categories. This is either for your information, or this is an idea that we need to develop, or a question that we need to answer. So there's this developmental discussion time. Or this agenda item needs to be decided upon today, and we have to nail that down. Or we've made some plans, and now we need to coordinate. Now we need to figure out how we're going to execute or deliver on this particular item or this decision that we've made. And then for virtual meetings especially, I try to assign pre-meeting work. Hey, here's something you need to think about, or here's something you need to research and be ready to talk on when you get into the meeting. So those are some of the things that you do before the meeting. And I would say one of the really key things is starting early. If you're going to start on the top of the hour, come on to the group 10 minutes before, so that you can just have that catch-up time. That's a really critical aspect of getting to know people and keeping the relationships going. Well, then there's what we do during the meeting. So these are things like starting the meeting with learning. A key way to promote trust is to know the other people and intentionally learning about their goals, their motives, their commitment, their expertise, their expectations, and then just some fun stuff. Like, what are their hobbies, or a particular cultural take on a specific issue, like how their culture views social distancing. Just yesterday, I got this video from Taiwan, and these Chinese people made this kind of spoof about social distancing and how ridiculous, it can be. Just little things like that keep us human and keep our contexts human. I try to go with like one person on this next meeting. We're gonna ask this about you, or we're gonna ask you to share something, from your hobbies or your interests, or just your social commentary on the world around us. So just getting that learning, but being intentional about it. Collaboration and meeting over virtual networks is all about intentionality. If there's one thing that you walk away with, it's that you need to be intentional in these meetings. Utilizing whiteboard or mind mapping software so that you can share a screen and everybody can see. I use a lot of mind mapping so that you can record ideas and then you can actually move them around on your screen. So if you haven't looked into mind mapping software, check that out. It's super intuitive and very visual, and it helps you to group your ideas and comments together. Another thing I do is stand back, so I won't do it right here, but I have a stand-up desk, so I will raise my desk up and I'll stand back so that people can actually see my hand motions and see more than just the head. That helps to communicate body language. That helps to bring, like stereo speakers to a context where people can actually see you moving around, and it's not just your head, this talking head on a screen. Another part of intentionality is calling out individuals for input. You need to manage verbal space in the same way that you need to manage the verbal space in a room when you're sitting face to face and not letting one person dominate the discussion. This is even more critical in a virtual environment because it's hard to butt in when it's virtual, because sometimes the sound will click or things will happen. So as one who is facilitating the network meeting, you need to call out and say, hey, Michael, or hey, Daniel, or hey, Peter, what do you think about that idea? Or did you have anything else to add? I make sure to go around the circle, if you will, and ask everyone on the call for a response or another question or whatever. I'm very intentional about that, and it's a bit awkward at first, but then you get used to it. And people respond to that when they get called out to be able to get some space to speak into things. And even if they don't want to say anything, just the opportunity to create space for them to talk is really important. I like to limit the group size to about 7 people. I know that may not be possible for you in your networks, but I've found over the years that once I have more than 7 people on a call, managing that verbal space and being intentional and getting to know them, it just gets more and more difficult. So if you have the opportunity to limit your group size, I found that 7 is a pretty good number. Then overstuffed is underprocessed, and so you really need to time out your agenda and make sure that you're getting to your things, and then scheduling that next meeting. It's much easier to do it when you're online and people can look at their calendars right there. It's more difficult when you're trying to do it later. You have to do with polls. And then after the meeting, just posting notes and agreed upon actions to a common website, to a common document, regularly updating the network website. There's a lot of great software out there that is super helpful, but it's only helpful to the point that people are putting data into it. One of the biggest disappointments I got when I was interviewing people about this topic was that they've got this great software, they got this great teaming and network site, and yet their coworkers or the people in their networks are not updating the data into that software, and so the software is not able to do what it's meant there to do. So really getting your people to update their whatever they need to in your group software, your networking site, is really critical for, again, that feeling of not being disconnected and not being uncoordinated. And personally, I've just found that I must get face-to-face with our group at least once a year in order for the virtual environment to really work powerfully. That's just been our experience. And so we do get face-to-face actually 2 to 3 times a year. And when we do, we spend about 50% of the time relationship building and then 50% of the time on work when we are face-to-face, because that makes the rest of the year work well for us. That's been our experience. Okay, so that was kind of bridging the gaps when you're meeting together. Now we want to just talk about how to bridge the distance when it comes to culture. There's this great resource by Erin Meyer called the Culture Map. She has a website as well. She works out of France, and she works with just helping us understand these 8 different scales that we find in cultures, like as you can see, those 8 different skills, I won't read through them all, but they're high context, low context, and communicating. So for example, Germany is low context, very direct. They want to speak frankly and directly with facts and data, and they want it very direct. Whereas high context is Japan, where they have this phrase in Japanese of reading the air. People will talk around and around and around, and the facilitator or the leader is supposed to understand what everybody is saying and then come together with consensus and make a decision. And they call it reading the air. The problem is when you have a country or people coming from that kind of context, and say from the Philippines or from China, they're also reading the air, but they're reading it a little differently, and that can get to be very confusing. So in a virtual environment, what we found is that we must be direct, we must be intentional, and that creates the least amount of misunderstanding. It may be uncomfortable for some of our brothers and sisters who come from cultures and contexts where being direct is not natural and not normal for them. But the Filipinos and the Chinese and the Japanese, the Asians that I've been working with, we've grown into this so that we can be more direct with each other, because when we're meeting virtually, it's just, hard to read the air, and being able to be direct is so much better. Deciding. Some places are very top down, where the facilitator just hears what everybody's saying and then makes a decision. Others, it's very consensual, and you need to dig around the roots. Again, another Japanese expression, before deciding. Whereas in a place like China, the boss decides, and then the boss is responsible to give very clear instructions on what people are supposed to do now with this decision. So these cultural contexts make it very challenging, especially when you're not meeting face to face. So things that we work through with our teams or our networks is we at some point during the early days of getting the network together, we will ask these questions. How are we going to communicate? Are we going to communicate directly? That's probably the preferred way for us to operate in a virtual context. How will we present ideas? Do you want the data first and then the conclusion afterwards, like a German would? Or do you want the conclusion and the executive summary first and then back it up with data? That's more of an American way. But you need to decide on that and how ideas will be presented. How are you going to evaluate and give feedback? How are you going to make decisions? And again, being intentional in a virtual network or virtual context, I go around and I ask every person. I don't just say, hey, are we all good with this? And people will typically be quiet. So you need to go around and ask people. Again, that puts some people on the spot. But in this environment, we found that that's the best way to be able to move the meeting forward and not have some people feeling left out because there was no space for them to voice up, or they were just hesitant culturally. How will we disagree? How late is late? And then how is somebody going to lead? How are you going to facilitate this network? Because again, just being virtual demands so much more intentionality. What's going to be appropriate to move things along? And I think that's an important discussion to have, so that people don't feel like you're forcing it or you're just being an American or whatever. This is the reality of the virtual environment. So let's talk about what it looks like to facilitate a network meeting and move it along. All right, so that's been a lot of fire hose information at this point, and I'd like to just step back now and turn over to you, Michael, and let's get some chat responses going here.
Sure. Isn't it great to hear some of this great content? And I'm finding it so practical. And as I'm thinking about some of these virtual meetings that I'm hosting, and I'm excited about using some of these practical tips, like starting 10 minutes early, and even that walk around and the step back. Yeah. I thought, man, these are great gems. And then that list of how questions that you review, just this last slide, is just so great, being intentional about making decisions together as a group. I wanted to encourage us to use that Q&A box or the button. We have 8 questions lined up. Some of them overlap, but if there are questions throughout that you have, then go ahead and click on that button, type out your question, make it specific. I think some of those great responses come when we get specific questions. Right now, we have a chance for you to have a chat response. Here's our question that we'd like for you to respond to. It relates with the differing cultural values and how they've been a challenge. I'm going to change the word from have to what. What differing cultural values have been a challenge in connecting and communicating with your network? So tell us a little bit in the chat box what has been a challenge in connecting and communicating related to those cultural values, and if so, how have they been a bit of a challenge?
Should I go back to that slide just so that they can see some of those?
Yeah, that might be helpful.
Yeah.
And as you're responding, make sure it is going to all panelists and attendees, not just the panelists here. So the difference of task versus relationship have created some tension. Liz says that. Mm-hmm. And again, the question is that we're going after: what values have been challenging for you and your network in online meetings?
Yeah, task versus relationship is huge. And unfortunately, virtual networks tend to be task orientated. And therefore, that's why it's so important to build a relational side when you're meeting virtually, doing that walk around the room, standing back and letting people see a little bit more of you, taking that time before the meeting to just catch up with each other. Those are, super important.
Here's another one, giving negative feedback in an honor-shame culture.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much no matter, whether you're meeting together face-to-face or meeting together virtually. But again, the virtual side doesn't give you that ability to reach out and touch the person.
Yeah.
You can't put your arm around them. You can't, in Japan, we didn't do that anyways. We were bow and stuff, but it's just that inability to be present. When presence is absent is one of the chapters in my book, and just talking about, what we lose when we're not present. And so, yeah, the opportunity to figure, that's why asking these questions up front and talking them through with your network up front helps people not to be surprised when you are not responding to them in the way that they would expect you to if you were sitting with them in their culture, in their own side of the world.
That's great. Let me read off a couple others just to help us get our head around it. One person had said, I'm scrolling up because I lost it, but I thought it was really good. When maybe newer people to the network begin joining the meeting, that can be a bit of a challenge.
Yep.
When the facilitator comes from a totally different culture from the rest of the participants who come from another culture.
Right.
Not many different culture, but one of the same culture. Thus, the facilitator is not able to engage everyone well.
Yeah. I'm in one network where we take turns facilitating, and it works really well because everyone's a very good facilitator. I'm in another network where some people are better than others, and so we've had to kind of, in order to keep the thing moving along, we've had to identify just like 2 or 3 who are going to regularly facilitate, as opposed to rotating it all around. It gets a little bit tricky, but you need to keep that meeting moving.
I'm seeing a few related to language of when we're speaking too rapidly. Maybe I'm prompting this question or this note here, but speaking too rapidly in a multilingual group for non-English speakers to follow easily. And another person brings up the pace of the meetings. Sometimes they move too fast, or we lose track of the most important points in the meeting.
Right. So true. And I would suggest then the mind map software, where you can capture the phrase, the key phrase from what a person is saying, and it's in a bubble, and you can move that bubble around. And you get this visual representation of the comments or the thoughts or whatever. And so you can move those bubbles around and give this visual presentation. I found with my coworkers from other cultures that particular software, that visual presentation of a discussion has been really helpful.
They respond to that well.
Yeah.
They respond to that. They find it helpful.
Respond to it because they can see, and they can see that the phrase that captures what has been said, and they can read it. And then that just helps with working through a presentation.
Well, let's end our chat participant response and step into the next section. Thanks so much.
Super, thanks. Because we do have a time constraint here. We need to move on. I will try to talk a little bit slower. So trust sets you free to make decisions because you trust the motives and the abilities of other people. And that's the relational side of the network that needs to be developed, that I can trust my coworkers and my teammates, their motives, as well as their abilities to deliver what they promise on time and with high quality. Trust sets you free to be transparent because you know that others are committed to you and to your joint goals. This is, again, there's a lot of studies that came up, one particularly by Google that said the best teams are not the teams that have person A, B, C, and D with all of their skills. The best teams are the teams that are transparent with each other. And the best collaborative groups are those who trust each other. And then trust sets you free to focus on innovation and action, not worrying about the motivation and the competency of others. You can focus on ideas and actions because you trust other people. So how do you build trust? Lots of books written about this, but as I've culled through those things, I just come to this kind of 3-question place where the motives, can I trust you? Are you honest and good? Will you not take advantage of my openness? Can I trust you not to punish or humiliate me for speaking up with questions, ideas, concerns, or even sharing my mistakes? One of the things that keeps us from speaking and sharing and being transparent is that we don't want to slow the meeting down. We don't want to ask a dumb question. We don't want to seem like we're out of the loop. So we just agree and go forward. And if we really want to have a trusting network that is able to be transparent and learn and grow together, we've got to get past that. So talking about that with your group, that listen, we're not going to punish you and we're not going to embarrass you. And so, co-workers, don't make any stupid remarks when somebody asks a question. Let's just create that environment of safety so that people can really express what they're feeling. Relationships, do you care? Do you know and understand me in my context? And that's, again, just the relational side where we need to understand where people are coming from. One thing that I've asked of our people is let's understand what's going to happen in this meeting today. Some of us work from home, and so are your kids going to come into the door? Or is your wife going to start printing something on the machine right beside you? That's okay. This is our real world. Let's understand that and let's care for each other. Will you work for my best in the accomplishment of our agreed upon goals? Do you care for who I am and what we're trying to do together here? That's a critical piece of trust. And then skill. Do you have the ability and the competence and the drive to deliver on your promises? These are some of those key questions that are answered over time and experience. But when you start starting out with a network, you may not know and may not be confident of the answers to those questions. So there is this trust progression that takes place in any team, but it is especially true on a virtual team or a virtual network. That at the beginning, you just need to extend trust to others. You need to say, I believe that that I can trust them, that they care, that they can help me. I believe that they're going to not shame me. You just extend that trust to others. And then another principle is just that seek first to understand and then to be understood. One of the best things I learned through going through being certified as a coach is to stay curious. Always stay curious in a conversation. Typically, I jump to what's the answer and how am I going to explain it. But it's a real discipline to stay curious and not try to think of what the answer is right away, but just what's the next question? How am I going to understand this better? How do I pull more out of that person or out of that situation so that we all can understand this better? Stay curious, and then start moving to being understood and perhaps moving towards a solution. Keep your commitments. Uh, Being a promise keeper will build that trust that you do care, you can help, and you will to the best of your ability. And then this principle of seeking the kingdom first. Um, how do we, especially as networks, how do we share together? And this is not necessarily for virtual networks. This is just a freebie for you. But there's a book called Rooting for Rivals by Peter Greer and Christopher Horst. And they talk about choosing abundance over scarcity and choosing kingdom over clan as two practices, two disciplines that will help us seek first the kingdom of God. And everything else will come after that. But just consistently choosing that I'm going to believe that I have to get my piece of the pie. No, I'm going to believe that God will abundantly provide and we don't have a scarcity situation here. And choosing to believe that I'm going to think about the kingdom and not just my organization. I'm going to think about the kingdom and not just my project or priorities. So just this trust progression as we extend trust to others, as we seek to understand their context and what's going on in their lives, as we keep our commitments, and then as we practice the disciplines of choosing abundance so that I can do deep and generous collaboration with this group in my network, choosing kingdom over just the priorities of my organization or my projects. In that way, you can build that trust so that you have that openness and that willingness to share and collaborate and go deep for the sake of the name of Jesus among all the nations. So as we get near to the end here now, so what? And I would just suggest this: focus on the process and not just the product. Focus on the process of coming together, of meeting, of getting to know each other, and not simply the product of the decisions and the actions that you take. Process is 80-90% of what we do. Product is just that final 10%. And why do we want to focus on that product or that process? To accelerate the progress of the gospel to the unreached. We need better connection and better communication so that we can collaborate. Well, how do we do that? How do we focus on the process? Understand any disconnect that people in your network might be experiencing, and then try some of those distance spanning ideas that I suggested earlier. Then identify your group culture by working through the questions and make a plan to build trust and establish some vital behaviors, like thinking about scarcity, choosing abundance over scarcity, and choosing kingdom over clan as vital behaviors for moving your network forward. And then finally, just getting back to this image of the stand of trees. Above ground, each tree and ministry can look different and unique, but below ground, at the network, the roots are grafted together to strengthen the whole stand, enabling them to withstand the various storms and seasons of life. To understand we lose connection and communication between trees. That is the most common cause of weakening and death. When they lose communication, that's the most common cause of weakening and death. And to understand that, we need to understand that this below ground network of roots and fungi. A tree is not a forest. On its own, a tree cannot establish a consistent local climate. It is at the mercy of the wind and the weather, but together, trees can create this ecosystem, this whole environment, and they can keep things cool when it's too hot outside. They can share water when it's dry. They do that together and they create this stand of trees. They graft their roots together in communication and collaboration so that the whole stand of trees can remain healthy and endure the different seasons of life and ministry. And as one author called it, it's a wood wide web. And so I'd encourage you with this wood wide web to carry on with your vital ministry, especially during this time of COVID-19, to carry on your vital ministry of collaborating, to communicating, and of sharing the love of Jesus to those who are feeling isolated and those who are feeling uncertain about what's happening now and what's going to happen in the future. A couple of resources to help you along in your journey. For scheduling meetings for multiple time zones, I gave you a web link there, just timeanddate.com. For networking platforms, there's a couple of different platforms that are available. There's this great website that Daniel Dow introduced me to last week for strategies for collaborative conversations. I mean, they have 33 different strategies beyond a presentation or beyond a discussion or beyond a Q&A. They have these other strategies for getting people talking to each other and then talking together in the group. Really, really cool stuff. I've just started diving into it, but I'd encourage you also to check out Liberating Structures. There's a great article on virtual distance, on the subtle ways our screens are pushing us apart, or navigating cultures with Aaron Meyer. And then if you want to dig into what it really means to have a stand of trees, there's this neat book by Peter Wohlleben, The Hidden Life of Trees. And I believe that we're also offering up a PDF chapter of my book on speaking up, creating a speak up environment, this environment of safety. So those are a few of the resources. And as I believe, I'm sure others of you are dropping into the chat box, other resources that you've come across that will help the network here. So look forward to seeing those as well. Well, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I notice on the slide it says Q&A, and you have a thing up in Canada for this. What's an example of using this well?
So Tim Hortons is closing, eh?
Oh, okay.
Actually, Tim Hortons, McDonald's, Starbucks, they're all closing here last night. They began closing and are only doing takeout, no eat-in.
Wow. Well, I would love to open this for a response with one question. This is putting it to the entire group. What tips and tools have helped your meetings? And we want to just put anything and everything, the best ideas that you have, resources. Maybe it's a platform or a certain resource like Liberating Structures that you had mentioned that you'd gotten from Daniel. Yeah. What else has just been a real blessing to you as you've navigated this virtual environment? Please go ahead and drop that in the chat, and then we'll get into a time here with the Q&A. And I have a few questions that I've highlighted. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we will look at some of them. One question from Jeremy, he asks, what do you mean by personal or cultural questions at the beginning of a meeting? So I think he's asking, what are the practical things that you start off with to, is it just an opening question?
Sure. So the example I gave was, how is your culture responding to social distancing right now that everyone is asking us to do? Are they like, some cultures are like, no, forget it, we're still meeting together because that's what we do. Other cultures are going to the extremes that are, as a culture, they're rule followers and they're really taking it to the extreme. So just a cultural question about a hobby, about an interest, or about a current event. How does your culture respond to, and then whatever that would be.
That's great. Liz asked this question, and I saw it as well from a couple others, but often it's frustrating in Zoom when people call in on the phone and you don't know who they are. Yeah. How do you navigate that?
Oh, we always ask people to introduce themselves. Actually, a couple of things. Sometime I've taken a screenshot of either my screen of all the people on it, or when we meet together as a group, face to face, I'll take a picture, and then I'll have that picture. I won't show it. Anyways, I'll have a picture, and that's a actual physical picture by my desk, so that I'm like I see them here too. But if somebody's calling in just on the phone, I got their picture here, and it gives you that visual reminder that this person is a human being. But practically, they need to introduce themselves before we
that's
carry
great.
on.
Yep. Practically speaking, David Pope is asking this: how often can you call a group together online, and how long can you maintain their attention in an online meeting? There
Yeah.
seems to be less accountability to be, quote, in the room and present when it's virtual.
Yeah. So with the team that I meet with regularly, we have either a 102 hours is probably the longest that you can endure, with a break in between. 60 to 90 minutes is preferred. And I get all of my coworkers, as we meet on these groups, I'll get them to promise there's no email. If you're surfing the web, you're surfing the web specifically for a reason that we're talking about. And get off your phone, put your phone away, put it on mute, and put it off to the side. I was looking at mine to watch the time, but so I ask people, no email, no phone, and if you're going to be surfing, you're surfing for a topic that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's good. I've sometimes I try to employ the practice of turning off notifications, and when at all possible, if I cannot be in a coffee shop, I seem to focus okay, but other people I'm with, they're getting distracted by people walking by. Here's another question. How do we not lose those on our network teams who might be less literate and or poor access to technology and connectivity? How can we keep them in the conversation when they may miss a percentage of the key discussion?
That is a very good question and very difficult to get over. I've faced that in Southeast Asia with a couple of teammates. When their internet is so slow, we turn off video. So that's our first activity, is to turn off the video, and so you just have audio. But when they have brown, like there's some things that you cannot overcome technologically because of their particular context. And if they are not highly literate, or they're not able to catch up via documents that you would send them, I'm asking right back to the crew here. I'm sure somebody else has probably got a better answer for that, because I don't know how to overcome some of that.
Could we use a bit of the collaborative group of 51 people here and go ahead and respond to that question in the chat? We want to learn from you. I'm going to try to copy and paste the question here into the chat.
I know for one of our people, the organization paid to upgrade, and I saw that fly through on the chats. The organization paid to upgrade their internet connection. That's a great investment that you can make into that person and into their participation in the network.
Yeah, and it's like, we want our sisters and brothers with poor internet connection. We need their voice, we need their strategy, we need their contribution, and we have to fight and try to help them.
And Michael, your little son is behind you, and
I know.
And that is great. We welcome that. We do not say, "Oh, can you get that distraction out of the screen?" That is just something you want to welcome, because that's part of your life. We want that to be part of our lives too. So,
well, thank you for being gracious and loving. I usually, when I'm presenting, I try not to have that with 50 people, but with a group of maybe 6 or 7, I would totally be more free. But so.
No, that's part of, I think, making this thing human and making it real.
Well, this is Redmond, and he's 3 years old, and I love him so much. So,
oh, fantastic!
He's our 4th little one. So, well, I think we still have a couple more minutes for questions. You mentioned, let's see here. Sorry, I'm scrolling through. There are some really great questions here. Here's one recent question that someone just typed in. Microsoft Teams Less than 12 months ago, my organization began using Microsoft Teams as our virtual platform for daily interaction and worldwide communication.
Yep.
With that in place, I guess this is maybe a comment, sorry, but I'm reading it and maybe others will benefit. So with that in place, we are able to smoothly transition our work in light of this COVID-19. It's been a huge blessing. Highly recommend Teams. And we're able to host daily staff meetings and hold meetings without complications. Thank you.
We also at Send, we do the same thing. We use Microsoft Teams.
Okay, that's great. And I'm really excited after this to look back at the chat and see what resources people are putting in. I can't do it right now, but I'm excited to see that. Any suggestions for teams of volunteers? So this is from Jason Martin. Any suggestions for teams of volunteers who may not have much time to commit to developing better virtual relationships?
Take 10 minutes every meeting. Introduce one person every meeting. So the 10 minutes before, just to socialize, and then take the first 5 minutes of your meeting and just say, okay, we're going to get to know Daniel today. And Daniel, here's 3 questions we want you to answer. Just tell us about whatever. And just each meeting you're doing one person, so that it's not over, you're not blowing a whole meeting on just introductions, but you're able to continue moving along, but also getting to know people.
Yeah, that's great. Here's another one from Peter. Face-to-face once a year seems as a minimum. What do you think would be the ideal?
Excuse me. Ideally, I would say 3 times if you can. That takes a lot of money and time, but that would get you to a place where you've just met the person 3 months ago. You've just been face to face 3 months ago, so that can carry you a long time.
Yeah. I was struck too. You said that during those face to face meetings, you spend 50% on relationship and 50% more on the content or the task that you're moving forward. Is that right?
Let me qualify that.
Yeah.
Well, there's one time a year that we get together for a couple of days, and at that point we do 50%, hiking, canoeing, whatever, and 50% on work. The other 1 to 2 times that we get together, usually 2 times that we get together, that's mostly work. That's not
Sure.
50%. But one time a year, we're spending 50% of our time just focused on relationships, just hanging out, creating memories together so that you can laugh about them.
Yeah.
Oh, can I give you one other thing?
Yeah.
We connect. We have backups. When technology fails, we know what we're going to back up to. So we're going to back up to what's the thing called? WhatsApp. We're going to back up to WhatsApp. And we have 3 groups on WhatsApp for the one team that I'm working on. We have a WhatsApp, work WhatsApp, obviously what's going on there. We have a fun WhatsApp just for memes and jokes and, banter back and forth. And then we have a prayer WhatsApp. And one of my teammates, his wife is really sick right now with COVID-19. And so our prayer WhatsApp is just, blowing up with people commenting and praying and stuff. So when your meeting doesn't work, know what you're going to back up to. Know what the default is going to be, how you're going to connect when the internet goes down or whatever. And connecting by WhatsApp and having different groups for different purposes has really worked well for us.
Yeah, and I do want to mention Slack. And for some, Slack has been a great tool, and there's different rooms that can be created for those similar purposes as well. So let's see here. I did see one question come in on the chat. I didn't want to miss that. Any suggestions for doing a leadership transition in a fully virtual voluntary group? So the entire team has not met each other and we're globally in a different location. Yeah.
That's a very unique kind of team and interesting team. Leadership transition depends on the context, I guess. Is the current leader choosing the next leader? Then it's just a matter of onboarding and ramping and resetting the culture around that new person. Somebody else said, the challenge of people coming in midway through a team. When you get a critical mass of people coming in, I challenge our teams to reset and just take the time, one meeting, to reset our culture and how we do things, because we've got a couple of new people coming in. That would be the same with a new leader. Resetting the culture at that point, resetting how that person is going to facilitate, how they're going to engage people, how they're going to draw people out, how they're going to decide and discuss, and those kind of things. Just resetting the culture of the team.
That's great. I want to close our time with just a few really important announcements and say thank you, first of all, Warren, for researching this topic, investing so much. And I'm thinking of the dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings you have hosted intentionally. You've crafted this, you've invested into other people, and then now you're sharing some of these best practices and stirring our mind and heart. And we just want to say, on behalf of this practice, this community at Synergy Commons, we want to say thank you for investing.
And I learned as I was preparing for this, and I'm sure once you guys share the chat with me, I'll even learn some more. So
isn't that great? So
let's all keep learning. Yep.
I want to just acknowledge we are in quite a time here. I'm going to just close in prayer. I know that each of you are carrying a load, and we totally, utterly depend on King Jesus, Holy Spirit, Heavenly Father. Let's do that. Let's close in prayer. And then this will all be made available on the Synergy Commons as a webinar that will be archived and available to be used as well later. So, King Jesus, you have authority and power and strength, and COVID-19 and all of the hoopla associated with that and the challenges. It did not sneak out from behind a rock and sneak up on you, God. You are sovereign, and you are allowing this for your purposes. And we're eager, Lord, to see how we can courageously, faithfully respond to neighbors and nations with your generous heart that lives inside of us. We love you, and I know that there's people listening here, either to this recorded message or live right now, who are carrying a weight. And we pray as a community of practice that you would pour out your Spirit on them, that they would sense your closeness and presence as they carry the different weights that they carry. Jesus, we love you and we worship you as a community here. Amen. Great. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.